Great. Well, hello and welcome to today's webinar, in which we will talk about best practices in supplement clinical trials. And we will focus today a little bit more on supplements, because historically studies with supplements are a little bit more complex and typically involve more than simple questionnaires. And we will discuss today study design, FTC regulations, the impact on clinical validation on credibility and consumer trust, and the impact that decentralized clinical trials have on cost and also efficiency. And in case you don't know who I am, my name is Susanne Mitschke, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Citruslabs. And Citruslabs is the fastest growing provider of clinical trials for brands. And we work with supplements, superfoods, cosmetics, devices, and also pet health products. And the end product is typically a substantiated product claim of a clinical study. And if you are interested in conducting your own research, you can contact us at hello@citruslabs.com and can visit us at www.citruslabs.com. And as always, some housekeeping. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box of Zoom or in the chat, and we will answer your questions at the end of the webinar. And I'm joined today by one of our own principal investigators, Dr. Swathi Varanasi. Swathi, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today and talking more about supplement clinical trials. And it would be great if you can just introduce yourself and how you got involved also in clinical studies.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm an integrative pharmacist by trade. And so, going through even I'll go back even before that. So growing up, in my household, we used food as medicine, thinking about Ayurveda, thinking about botanical medicine, but we also used over-the-counters and prescription medications too. So as I was assessing, what I wanted to do with my career, I thought pharmacy, kind of naively, would be a really great pick, because I thought that, going to pharmacy school would really encapsulate, pun intended, I suppose, that it really would include information about, supplements, because thinking about, in a pharmacy, there are supplements, but there are also the prescription medications and over-the-counter options. And so I get to pharmacy school and realize that's not the case, and it's really more focused on one versus the other. Not to say we didn't have any information on supplements, but we had quite a limited amount. But I was really interested, more particularly, in what we could do from a preventative health standpoint, and what else was out there in terms of different modalities that were evidence-based that could also work for patient care. And so this led me on a really interesting path to where I've now had the chance to be involved in everything from patient care, academia, the wellness industry, so health food, CPG, and even biotech. And a little bit more about my background is, as there really aren't that many integrative pharmacists out there, I met one at the time who really valued all these different modalities. So it was not just focused on, only prescriptions or only supplements, but thinking about how we can use them and evaluate what we call, as pharmacists or healthcare providers, as a risk versus benefit ratio. So thinking about from a patient perspective, from a personalized approach, what is going to make the most sense for each patient? Is it a prescription plus a supplement? Is it mindfulness and nutrition? Is it movement? Or is it likely a combination of all of the above? And so meeting her, I figured out that, we can start a program. So we started the first ever and still only postdoctoral residency training program for pharmacists interested in pursuing this route. So I got to be the first pharmacist. And then after that, I went back and did a postdoctoral fellowship in biotech. And that was very much focused on clinical trials, but also focused on medical affairs. So thinking about how to dissect all these studies that are out there, how to conduct them, but also once they're out there, how to dissect them and make them more digestible for consumers. And that has led me to my work in CPG and also in academia and clinical research, of course. So, that's a little bit about my background. I'm really passionate about bringing more clinical research and especially including transparency, which is why I resonate so much with what we do at Citruslabs, is because it's not only, having products out there, but what studies support them, how can we demonstrate efficacy and tolerability with these different products that really help consumers make the best decisions that are going to work for themselves.
And Swathi, obviously, we are seeing more and more clinical studies also, in the CPG, in the brand space. And why do you think it is so important for brands to conduct these clinical studies now?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's actually a really cool McKinsey, I don't know if it was cool, but there was a really great report out there, at least I think it's cool. McKinsey report that came out that was like the 1 trillion, wellness industry. And then it talked about, I'm sure you saw it, Susanne, also, where it's talking about like different factors and different, different trends that it talked about. But even before it talked about the trends, one of my favorite quotes from it is that I actually wrote it down because I was like, oh, this is too good not to say. So it's efficacy and scientific credibility are 2 of the most important factors to consumers when selecting wellness products. And I feel like that kind of sums up the whole report, but then it does go into some details as well to talk about that. One of the trends is actually that consumers are preferring clinical over clean. So I think more important than ever, consumers are interested in trials, and therefore brands are really interested in catering to their consumer. Because I mean, if you're in the CPG world, consumer first, and with the consumer first, we have to think about what they want. And so if they want to see more efficacy, they want to see more studies, they want to see, what they're spending their money on is actually going to work for them, then that's what, brands also need to cater to.
Absolutely. And we also conducted a survey with our study volunteers. And interestingly, it resonates what the McKinsey report said, that more and more consumers are looking for these clinical proof as well. And one thing that always makes me chuckle a bit when I get ads on Instagram, for example, of brands, and they make claims, and then I'm reading through the comments, and then the comments are always asking for like, oh yeah, great, but where can I read about the study? And some people even ask like, where's the clinicaltrials.gov link? And that makes me very happy.
Exactly. The consumer, like I call it the age of the conscious consumer. Like this is what the consumer wants. And so like whether it's, the brand or thinking about the actual like schema of what's going on in CPG, like we need to be there for the consumer and be able to provide that information for them.
Yeah, and I also quickly wanted to talk about different study designs, because we will probably hear a lot from you, Swathi, about randomized control studies. And I also just quickly want to mention that there are also other study types. And, one study design that everybody probably heard about before is the gold standard of clinical trials, a randomized controlled trial, an RCT. For example, a double-blind placebo-controlled study is part of, an RCT. And I'm often surprised even by industry experts that tell me, know about clinical studies, but then, show how little they actually know. Because one person, for example, told me that, an RCT is not the gold standard because it's not even double blind. And that stuck with me because, it shows that many people who know clinical study designs actually have no idea what they are talking about. So, quickly telling you what does double-blind placebo-controlled actually mean. And a study like that involves an actual intervention, the test product, and a placebo. And neither the study participant nor the researcher knows which product is the actual intervention and which one is the placebo. And the study design often involves biomarkers, which are objective ways to collect data. For example, blood work can also include stool markers like microbiome, for example, or skin analysis. And you can also add smart trackers like Fitbit or Aura or Whoop or smart scales to get more data. And we will talk about this specifically, these different methodologies later as well. And one study design that also falls under an RCT is a crossover study in which you have only one study group. But this group is their own placebo or their own control group. So one group will take the actual product and the placebo, or will go through a control phase as well. And then you have true single group studies. They are often referred to as pilot studies. And here you have one study group, but there's no control group, there's no placebo group. And then you have repeat measurements and compare baseline to end line or baseline, midline, end line to see if there was actually an effect. And ideally, single group studies also involve biomarkers to make them more robust. And then we also have perception studies. This type is not as scientific, and we almost exclusively see perception studies in cosmetics, skincare, hair care often uses this type of study, and it's just not a clinical trial. And if you decide to work with us with Citruslabs, we customize every study to your specific goals and to your specific needs, and we don't follow a one-size-fits-all approach, and we can conduct all of these study types from very complex multi-arm randomized control trials to crossover studies to single group studies to even perception studies. All right, now Swathi, we heard about different study designs, and what do you think are the key components of a well-designed clinical study?
Yeah, so the key components, I mean, and even thinking about not only the key components, but what really differentiates them with, what pharma companies might be doing, I think is also a great way to think about this question. So, with the key components, we need to think about from the patient population to start off with. So with the randomized control trial, part of the study protocol has inclusion, exclusion criteria. So what's really important is who are we actually recruiting and who are we deeming as eligible for, participating in this study. So this might have things like demographics, like age or weight or race, or maybe even areas of the country that you live in, or different, symptoms that you're experiencing. And what makes for a great supplement trial is if you're not including any diagnosed conditions. This is a really big difference from what pharma does. So pharma is looking specifically, because they're looking to get FDA approved, which requires a really long regulatory FDA process, or a process that's regulated by the FDA. And so this involves a lot of different stages of clinical trials. But at the end of the day, they're looking for approval, which means that they are going to be prescribed, and the terminology is that they will be indicated for XYZ condition or use cases. Whereas supplements, before they're put on the market, they actually don't have to do any required clinical trials. And oftentimes if they do clinical trials, and not always, but oftentimes when they do them, they're actually called post-marketing studies, because they're already on the market. And so this is after they've been added to the market that the studies are done. We've also at Citruslabs worked with supplement companies that are looking to launch a brand new product. And so they're looking at it more of like, oh, before we launch, we want to have all these great data points to speak to our consumers. So supplement trials can be done on both sides, pre-launch or post-launch. A lot of them are done post-launch. Whereas in pharma, the majority of clinical trials that are done that, you'll see in the package insert of a drug, those were all done before they were FDA approved, and they were actually a part of the required process to get FDA approved. So that's one thing I wanted to bring up, is like that key distinction of like using, is the participant experiencing XYZ things in terms of symptoms versus is the patient diagnosed with a certain condition in terms of eligibility for the study. So the first one I mentioned is for supplements, so the symptoms part, whereas getting diagnosed with something and looking for a treatment for it would be more in the pharma realm. So that's a key distinction. Another key distinction is actually very much what you mentioned, Susanne, with RCTs. So when pharma runs trials, more often than not, to be on the regulatory pathway to approval, they are going to be doing RCTs, so randomized placebo-controlled studies. Whereas, as Susanne mentioned, when we do a clinical trial outside of the scope of the FDA pathway and we're just dealing with supplements, you can do all kinds of different studies. You could do within the clinical trial realm, single group, placebo-controlled, active controls. Like there's lots of different ways you can do clinical trials there. And you can also do perception studies with supplements. So those are two like key differentiators. What they do have in similarity though, is that both of them do have, you know, kind of primary and secondary objectives to their study. So at the end of the day, you enter a study with a goal, and the goal is oftentimes called the objective. And so it's like, what are you actually looking to learn about the product and how is it going to impact the specific patient population? So those are similar in that, you know, when we go into a study, whether it's a supplement or a pharmaceutical product or a drug, that both sides are going to be looking for how is this going to improve XYZ things for the patient.
I like that you started off with inclusion exclusion criteria, because I think one thing that we ran into now also with the updated FTC regulation is that attorneys, lawyers are more often now involved in also designing the study, which, you know, obviously helps brands to stay compliant with fairly still vague regulation, but it also makes our job a little harder because oftentimes, you know, attorneys want to be on the super safe side, and then they make the inclusion exclusion criteria too broad. So that, you know, that can be a challenge. And I think this is something that the industry still has to figure out, you know, basically going in that one path where, you know, you are following all regulations and, you know, really nailing your study design. And I think it will evolve as, you know, more and more studies get out there and get published.
Yeah, I would agree. I would definitely agree.
And almost every study we work with, you know, is an efficacy study. And obviously every brand wants to get the best possible results also for their studies at the lowest possible budget. And what do you think, Swathi, is a challenge in designing these types of studies?
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, you know, the way that at least we approach it at Citruslabs is that it's a collaborative process. And so we really want to understand what the sponsor wants or what the company in question, what they're looking for out of the study. Is it certain marketing claims? Do you want to be published? Do you want to have a clinicaltrials.gov profile? Do you want to have your results on there? And really, what is your goal in entering a study? And so I think that once we can understand and kind of be on the same page, then, you know, that really helps. And then the other thing, you know, especially as I mentioned before, with supplement trials in particular, you can't look for, you know, in terms of eligibility, inclusion, exclusion, we can't be looking for people who are diagnosed with things. So we have to be a little more strategic and a little more innovative with how we're going about eligibility. And especially as we're evaluating the participants' experience, there are different ways to go about that. So the two ways that I think about it, to kind of branch it in two sides, is there's the objective side and kind of the more subjective side. And so when we're thinking about creating a study, we have to think about what are we going to do to get the most amount of data to potentially help the sponsor say, you know, XYZ things that they want to say in marketing, or maybe if they want to get it published, to make it the most compelling, rigorous study to get published. And so generally what we do is a combination of objective and subjective measures. So objective is kind of what you mentioned already, Susanne, with like an RCT. So validated tools like questionnaires, saliva tests, blood tests, stool samples, and even involving, especially from a virtual standpoint, involving, you know, experts. So whether that's skin grading from a dermatologist, or, you know, thinking about how we can involve other, like a hair specialist, like a trichologist for a certain hair study. So that's more on the objective side. So this is, you know, is it yes or no? Is it, you know, in a validated questionnaire? picking specific, quantitative, time points or evaluation tools. So that's more on the objective side. On the subjective side, what we like to also include in, whether it's a clinical trial or otherwise at Citruslabs, is we like to include a more subjective side also. So a lot of the clinical trials will have the objective, but we'll also ask the participant questions about their experience using the product, their improvement in quality of life, which may or may not be a validated tool depending on the study. We might just ask them, since you've started taking it, how are you feeling about XYZ things? How are you, let's say it's a skincare study. How are you feeling about your skincare? How are you feeling about your confidence? How are you feeling about your dark spots? Different things like that. So we add this additional dimension, which, at the end of the day, we're trying to combat this challenge, which is we can't get a diagnosed condition in our eligibility. And so we're trying to figure out how can we get the most data out of these studies to then help our companies that we're working with really say what they want to say. So that's one way we combat that challenge of figuring out who we can have in the study and ensuring that we get the most out of the experience and the most out of the participants.
And one thing I also want to get in very briefly, because I think it's important, is the FTC guidelines. The FTC says that they want competent and reliable scientific evidence, which means tests, analysis, research, or studies that have been conducted and evaluated in an objective manner by qualified people, generally accepted in the profession, to yield accurate and reliable results. And the FTC then gives double-blind placebo-controlled studies as their example of what competent and reliable scientific evidence means. And that's correct, but we shouldn't forget pilot studies. And I often think it's really funny when pilot studies are actually published in journals because, the study then underwent a peer review process in which a study gets heavily scrutinized, and it's a published study. And I would love to really just see some guidance on that, because according to experts in the field, a published study is actually competent and reliable scientific evidence. So what do you think about that, Swathi?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think we need more regulation around some of these things. I think maybe some of the companies we work with would disagree with my statement, but I think that we do need more regulation around all these different types of studies, because I feel like there's so much focus on RCT, 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 and I can speak from like the healthcare provider side too. Is like even when people are thinking about, oh, could this botanical be or this product be a good choice for my patient? They want to see RCTs, and it's like not everything is about an RCT. There are so many other potential study designs, as we mentioned before, but I do agree that to get more acceptance from the healthcare provider community, there should be more regulation that comes, from the FDA, FTC down, so that we are holding, pilot studies and other type of studies to like similar standards so that they are then accepted in the same way an RCT has been like obsessively, like accepted in the healthcare provider community.
Exactly. And specifically when even, some pilot studies can actually be large, right? We have seen pilot studies with 50, 75, 100 people. It was all single group. They involved biomarkers. We have seen statistically significant changes in biomarkers, right? How is that not accepted? It's really mind-blowing to me.
I mean, another like type of, kind of like side note tangent about that is that, the parameters that they use. So thinking about like how drugs get FDA approved, what they deem as statistically significant in terms of like statistical significance versus clinical significance sometimes is quite different.
Yes.
So I find that dynamic really interesting. Is like at the end of the day, the placebo-controlled, trial that is listed in the package insert for this XYZ SSRI, it was statistically significant. It's like, cool, pat yourself on the back, but was it really clinically significant or like clinically relevant?
Yeah.
Really where I think there's a disconnect, because there's so much focus on, oh, it was statistically significant, but like did it really help the patients improve their, anxiety symptoms if we're continuing the SSRI example? So there's certain things like that. And also what RCTs sometimes miss in the pharma world is accounting for, different patient populations and different, subsections of populations, which I think is also a missing part.
Absolutely. It's about, is it clinically meaningful? And this is also, I think, one part where, there's kind of a disconnect is the larger the study, the better. But the larger the study, the more likely you are to overpower your study. And then you are more likely to actually get, more likely statistically significant results, but very likely not medically meaningful results. Where, let's look at blood pressure, right? If your blood pressure comes down from, let's say, 160 over 100, and then it goes down to 159 over 89. When you overpower your study, it could as well be a statistically significant result, but it's absolutely not meaningful.
Right.
All right, so let's talk a bit about methodologies. Big topic. And we have questionnaires. Questionnaires can give us, sometimes also objective data, especially when we are looking into things like mood, stress, cognitive function. These questionnaires are actually the gold standard to measure this, for example, through cognitive battery testing. But then we obviously also have other methodologies like blood work, stool, saliva, skin, digital markers. Do you think that every study should actually utilize something like blood work apart from questionnaires?
Ooh, I love this question. So I don't think it's required. I do think it depends on what the goal is of the study itself. Is the goal to be published? I think from a rigor standpoint, if you do involve things like, testing, that's creating more objectivity in the study and less potential for bias. So I do think that if you're looking to get it published, that is really compelling. I think it depends on how you're planning as a, brand to use that information. If you think that that's going to resonate with your consumers, to say that, like we can, decrease A1C by XYZ number. And we saw this over a 6-month trial of this supplement and that sort of thing. If you think that will resonate, I think the average consumer, granted, I think we are in the age of the conscious consumer. I don't know if the average consumer would really know what A1C is. So maybe like you can't necessarily use that in your marketing. However, let's say maybe you are a healthcare provider facing brand, you're a practitioner brand, and you're actually going to use this information in a white paper or marketing material to go straight to the HCP. That would be extremely compelling to see that this supplement helped A1C levels decrease. So depends on your audience, depends on what you're trying to do with it. If you want to publish it, love the idea of incorporating the more objective measures possible, but it really depends on also what that team, whether it's the science team or the marketing team internally of the brand, what they want to do with the information.
Yeah, so you think that if a brand, for example, can't afford objective data measurements, it's okay?
I think that it's like it depends on what they want. I think that in a clinical trial, you need to use some sort of validated objective measure. So if you are not using blood testing, I really think you need to be using validated questionnaires. And if you're not using, blood testing or saliva testing or something like that, think about how else you can add rigor to the study. So I guess to answer your question without going on and on for hours is like, I don't think it's required, but I do think that we need to think about what type of studies we're doing and what type of value they're going to be bringing the brand, but also bringing the end consumer too.
Absolutely. Yeah, I also think it depends on the product. I think when you, for example, weight loss is, we're in February, is still a big topic based on the year cycle, right? So if you include even if you don't include anything like lipids, for example, are huge, or A1C is huge also for weight loss. Like the minimum I think that brands should involve is weight, right? Objectively standardized weight. Um, maybe even blood pressure could make sense, but then also weight circumference, I think would be also a really good marker that is a little bit more, measurable. And then obviously specifically for weight loss, I think the quality of life questionnaires can be huge as well that you mentioned before, Swathi.
Mhm.
All right, so you already mentioned it, the McKinsey report. I also wanted to bring it up one more time. And the gist is that consumers really want clinical trials. And one thing that does not get talked about is transparency. Swathi, what is your take on transparency? What are you seeing specifically with brands that conduct their research? They're putting it on their websites, right? What are they doing well? And what do you think is not going so well with, showcasing results?
Yeah, I think that brands are worried about showcasing all their results because maybe all their results are not in the, 90s and 95% and things like that. So I think that reframing that discussion, and I know that you already mentioned as well the consumer report that Citruslabs did with, over 1,000+ people that, we asked them, what do you think of these percentages? What do they mean to you? Do they instill trust and different things like that? And we were surprised to see that consumers are actually a little concerned when they see like 90 to 95% because they're wondering, is this too good to be true? Are they potentially lying to me? Who did they really ask? And I guess like as a consumer, I totally resonate with that because when I see numbers like that, I'm like, I don't know. Whereas like when we see numbers lower than that, even the 60 and 70%, we're thinking like, oh, wow, that's 7 out of 10 people. That's, 6 out of 10 people. Like that could be me, right? So I think that it's a lot about the framing and like, or rather the reframing of, what consumers want to see and what consumers deem as, appropriate. And that 100% is not realistic, I think was the last webinar we did together. But like, I think even referring back to some of the information we talked about there is like, at the end of the day, transparency is what needs to happen. And I think some brands are going above and beyond with showcasing that in like a science page, or they're posting it on their social media. And they're really demonstrating that not only did they do a clinical trial, they're open to you seeing exactly what came out of that clinical trial. But I think other brands are still a little weary, even if they've gone to the extent of doing the clinical trial, they're afraid of putting all their information out there. I can speak to, I was recently speaking with a brand a few hours ago, and they actually did not want to put all of their information on clinicaltrials.gov because not all of it was the percentages they were expecting. And for everyone else's, background on clinicaltrials.gov, you can make a profile for your company, or rather Citruslabs does it when you work with us, that we make a profile. It has a little information about the company and the protocol itself, but you can choose after the trial is done to put in your results if you would like. And this brand was saying that they're actually not sure if they want to put all of their results on, they don't want to put their results on clinicaltrials.gov because it requires that you put everything. And they are not comfortable with putting everything on there. So I think that from a consumer standpoint, consumers, I think, would rather see all of it and be able to sift through it themselves and understand that not all of it was perfect, and that's totally fine, because no supplement should be perfect, nor should any drug be perfect for that matter, right? So certain things will, like certain supplements and certain drugs, help for different things in life and different symptoms. So I think that's definitely a challenge, and thing that I've seen recently where I'm like, some brands putting it all out there, super happy to share it, and then other brands are still not convinced that they want to be as transparent as others.
And I think it also comes down to brands trying to test as many endpoints as possible in these studies. And Swathi, you mentioned at the beginning, right, objectives. And a lot of brands, have not only like 2, 3 objectives, but we are including like 8 to 10 sometimes. And let's talk about women's health, right? So the primary endpoint should be an alleviation of period cramps. But then we are also testing for mood, for reducing breakouts, for what else can we do? For being less bloated, for example, right? And as long as your supplement, and if your supplement is to, alleviate the cramps, right? That is huge. And maybe it doesn't reduce hormonal breakouts, and that's fine. But why are you hiding it, right? It doesn't matter to the consumer if your product actually works to help with that one thing, because now we are, with these regulations, we are looking at, basically similar regulations to drugs, except that supplements can't make drug claims. And drugs typically also only do just one thing, right? They are not doing 10 things at once. So that is something that I think is probably playing into that as well. And I also feel that many brands are treating their study as a big secret, which does not make sense at all, in my opinion. We have a lot of brands that conducted randomized control studies and got statistically significant results, but they are just not using it, which is weird because there's some fear. And I don't know where this fear is coming from. It probably stems from, not being as comfortable with the science as they should be. But once you achieve a statistically significant result against a placebo, that means that your product works. So be proud.
I mean, I fully agree. I think that that's an opportunity, maybe that, there needs to be a little more education on, it's not only about like doing the study, but how can you really use the study to your advantage? So, maybe that's an opportunity for growth there too.
Absolutely. And last 2 questions for you, Swathi. What do you think are the pitfalls for conducting a study?
Yeah, I mean, when I think of the pitfalls, I think about, working with different brands and hearing things from them. And I think that they are expecting, I guess, first and foremost, they're expecting that like 95%. So I think that's one of the kind of pitfalls, at least that they view from their end. But it's also thinking about, once the study is completed, what sorts of claims are allowed and what are, I guess really what are allowed in terms of like a regulatory standpoint. So it's like not only completing the study, but what sorts of claims they can make. I see as sometimes a common pitfall of just like questions of like, how do I use this information? How can I best articulate it to my customer? And so I did want to review, that there are different types of claims that you can make. And the one that is generally like a thumbs up from FDA, FTC is structure function claims. So that's like supporting brain health or supporting skin health. Like that's a little vague, but like that's kind of the idea of like if something is supporting something else, it's promoting something, rather than saying like and coming out saying like more of a drug claim or a disease state claim, which is more of like this product can treat this product can cure this product can fully alleviate something. So there's a nuance there, but a nuance that the FDA and FTC is always on the prowl looking for. So that would be, something I would suggest that, you can work with our team, but also work with your trusted claims attorney. There actually are lawyers out there that specialize in this. So if you, have done a study or if you have not done a study, ensuring that whatever you want to say has the thumbs up from a lawyer who has specialty in this space and who knows the ins and outs of all things FDA, FTC, then that would be my suggestion to, not fall into, any of these issues, because I think that even once a study is done, even if you get statistically significant results on improving PMS, like at the end of the day, PMS is premenstrual syndrome. That is, in the DSM-5, that is a disease. So you have to be careful with saying, you can say symptoms associated with, you can state the symptoms, but saying the disease can be really complicated and put you on like the FDA watch list, so to speak. I won't say blacklist, but like the watch list of, oh, we need to monitor them. And the FDA loves sending out warning letters saying like, oh, this brand says they're a supplement, but they're using claims that sound a lot more like a drug claim, but they haven't gone through the regulatory pathway of getting approval. Like the FDA has not approved this medication or this supplement rather, but they're acting like a medication. So it's just things to be careful of. It's like one thing to do the study, but what you do after the study is just as important as doing the study itself.
Yeah, supplements keep healthy people healthy and helping with optimal health, right? And one quick sneak peek into our upcoming report is that, Swathi, you mentioned claims like supporting brain health, for example. We actually found that supporting brain health versus 75% reported or showed from cognitive battery testing improved focus, for example, actually resonates better with consumers versus just the more vague statement, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense though, because I think right now consumers are looking for things to not necessarily like support health and well-being, which like I don't mean to offend anyone if that's on your labeling, but I think that people are looking for more function specific like products. They're looking to like, if I buy this thing, what is it going to do for me? And especially in the economic market right now and inflation and all that good stuff, like I think people are thinking like, if I'm going to spend money, is this product going to work for me? Ergo, like what the McKinsey report said about, clinical over clean, but also what is this product really going to do for me? And so if they see something that says, ooh, focus, that makes a lot of sense for me that a consumer would want to buy something that said, can enhance focus versus, support brain health.
All right, now last question, and that's a big one, and maybe you can just sum it up in a couple of steps. In your opinion, what are the best practices for clinical studies in the supplement field?
Yeah, I think we went over a lot of it already, but I think some of the best practices are, even before doing a clinical trial, what are your brand's intentions of doing a clinical trial? Are you trying to get published? Are you trying to, have XYZ marketing claims? I think coming in with clarity and knowing what you're looking for out of the experience, so like the intentionality behind it, I think that's like first and foremost. And then once you're going through and doing the study and working with, a team, I would say that would probably be like the next step is like once you've decided, yes, we definitely want to do a study for insert reason here. I think it's finding the right partner who can guide you on that journey because clinical trials can be really overwhelming. If you have an internal clinical team or, a research focused someone on your team, that would be awesome. There's also, companies like Citruslabs who can, do everything end to end for you. So I think finding the right partner is really helpful. And then alongside that partner is also finding a really great claims attorney once a study is done. So, having like the right people surrounding you in terms of like creating the, protocol, executing the study, all of those good things. And I think that, I mean, to me, those are like the top main things is like, why do you want to do a study? Why does it like matter to you? Why does it matter to the company? What are you looking to get out of the study? And then who can you work with to really execute the study efficiently? I know a lot of brands are on like very, short turnarounds and everything. So it's like, if you can figure out like who's going to help you get to the end goal by, your preferred timeline, I think I think that would be, a great thing to consider. And, also when you're going through the study process, what sort of study do you want, right? Because if you're thinking of like, do you want to say that our product versus this other product that's like a top seller, like we can use like a retinol, for example, like do you have a retinol alternative that's, plant derived, that's, that has a lower side effect profile or something than a retinol? Maybe if you want to say that your product is better than that, maybe an active comparator study makes the most sense instead of a placebo, because maybe that person has already experimented with retinol, so You don't want to go against a placebo because this person's already trying retinol. Demonstrate that your product is better than the retinol. So it also depends on, like, again, like the goal of your study, what you're looking to get out of the study, and what type of claims you want to make, and then who you can work with to get to that end goal.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Swathi. And I think it's time for questions. Please put them in the Q&A box or in the chat. And while you type in your questions, I quickly wanted to let you know about our next webinar on March 21st at 10 a.m. Pacific time, where we discuss ethical marketing and transparency. It's a huge topic with none other than the Kiehl's heir, Jamie Heidegger, and her daughter, Hannah. And Jamie sold Kiehl's in the year 2000 to L'Oreal and has since started a new beauty line called Retrouvé. And it will be an amazing webinar that you should not miss. And you can just scan the QR code to register. All right. Let's see. Are there any questions from you? Well, it seems that this was a very comprehensive webinar. It seems that there are no questions. So if you are interested in conducting your own clinical study, you can reach out to us at either hello@citruslabs.com, or you can contact us on our website on www.citruslabs.com. And thank you so much for joining this webinar today. And again, if you want to join the next one, you can just scan the QR code. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and that we'll see you next time. Bye.